August 1, 1941. Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Chief Engineer Robert Hall sat in the pilot's seat as the prototype lumbered down the runway, its barrel-shaped fuselage seeming almost too heavy for a single engine to lift. The XTB-1 prototype rotated skyward, and in that moment, critics within the Navy shook their heads. The biggest single-engine aircraft they had ever seen. Too complicated, too heavy, too ambitious. None of them could have known that this ungainly bird, dismissed by skeptics as an engineering disaster waiting to happen, would go on to sink more enemy warships than any other American aircraft in history. The mathematics of naval warfare were about to be rewritten, not through elegant design, but through sheer devastating effectiveness, wrapped in an overcomplicated package that somehow worked better than anything else in the sky. The journey to this moment began in March 1939 when the United States Navy issued a requirement that would challenge every aircraft manufacturer in America. The Douglas TBD Devastator, introduced in 1937, was already obsolete. The Navy needed a replacement, and they needed it fast. The requirements seemed impossible. A top speed of 300 miles per hour, a range of 1,000 miles, a crew of 3, all ordnance carried internally in a bomb bay, armor protection for the crew, self-sealing fuel tanks, and, most ambitiously, an electrically powered dorsal turret, a feature that had defeated every previous attempt. 13 companies submitted proposals. The competition quickly narrowed to 2 finalists. Vault Aviation offered the XTBU-1, a sleek, elegant design that initially won praise from Navy evaluators. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation submitted the XTBF-1, a design that looked like someone had taken their successful F-4F Wildcat fighter and inflated it to grotesque proportions. The Vought design was prettier. The Grumman design was complicated.
Vought got the initial contract, but VA was already drowning in orders for their F-4U Corsair fighter. They could not possibly deliver torpedo bombers in the time frame the Navy needed. The contract was transferred to Grumman, and Leroy Grumman's team found themselves with an impossible deadline to build an impossible aircraft. Robert Hall, the engineer in the trenches, stared at the mountain of requirements. Everything the Navy wanted required adding weight, complexity, and systems that had never been successfully integrated into a carrier aircraft. The internal bomb bay alone was a nightmare. It needed to be large enough to hold either a 22.4-inch Mark 13 torpedo weighing 2,000 pounds, or 4 500-pound bombs, or depth charges, or mines. The bay doors needed to operate reliably in salt spray, high-G maneuvers, and combat damage. The powered turret presented even greater challenges. Previous attempts at rear turrets had failed because hydraulic and manual systems were too slow, too unreliable, too vulnerable to battle damage. Grumman chose an electrically powered turret, betting the entire design on technology that had never been proven in combat. If the electrical system failed, the rear gunner would be helpless. The wing folding mechanism added another layer of complexity. To fit on carrier elevators and in hangar decks, the wings needed to fold, but the Avenger's wings were the largest span of any Navy aircraft, 54 feet fully extended. Leroy Grumman himself solved this problem during a design meeting. Using a pink eraser to represent the fuselage and paper clips as wings, he discovered what became known as the stow wing, a compound angle folding mechanism that allowed the massive wings to fold back and upward simultaneously, reducing the wingspan to just 18 feet. The mechanism required hydraulic systems, locking pins, and structural reinforcements that added hundreds of pounds. The Ryder 2608 engine, a twin-row 14-cylinder radial producing 1,700 horsepower, was the most powerful engine available. But even this monster struggled to lift the loaded aircraft. Empty weight, 10,080 pounds. Combat loaded weight, 15,095 pounds. This made the TBF the heaviest single-engine aircraft in the world. Critics within the Navy called it the pregnant beast. Others called it the turkey. The names were not compliments. On December 30, 1940, the Navy placed an order for 286 TBF-1 aircraft, more than 7 months before the prototype had even flown. The urgency was clear. War was coming, and the Navy needed torpedo bombers immediately. Complications or not. The prototype's first flight on August 1, 1941 revealed both promise and problems. The aircraft flew, but it flew like a truck, heavy, ponderous, nothing like the nimble fighters pilots were accustomed to. The controls were mushy, the visibility was poor for the pilot. Despite the high cockpit placement, the aircraft demanded constant attention, constant correction, constant muscle. But it was stable. It could carry its full load. And the internal systems, all those intricate systems that critics said would fail, actually worked. Then came November 28, 1941. The first prototype caught fire during a test flight near Brentwood, New York. Both test pilots, Bob Hall and Gordon Israel, successfully bailed out as flames consumed the aircraft. The prototype crashed and was destroyed. Critics pounced.
The design was too elaborate, too many systems, too many failure points. The electrical turret, the folding wings, the massive bomb bay, all of it was too ambitious. The program should be canceled. Grumman's response was to accelerate. The second prototype was nearly ready. Testing continued. Modifications were made. Problems were solved through brute force engineering. On January 3, 1942, the first production TBF-1 was completed. Less than 5 months after the first prototype crashed, less than 4 weeks after Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. By early June 1942, more than 100 TBF Avengers had been delivered to the Navy. 6 of these aircraft were assigned to Torpedo Squadron 8 for evaluation. The squadron's Devastators had already deployed aboard the carrier Hornet. The 6 Avengers arrived at Pearl Harbor just hours after the carriers had departed for a crucial battle near a tiny atoll called Midway. Volunteers were called for. 6 crews raised their hands. Many had never flown out of sight of land. All 6 aircraft made it to Midway Island. June 4, 1942, 0710 hours. 6 brand-new TBF Avengers took off from Midway Island's Henderson Field, part of the first wave of attacks against the Japanese carrier fleet. The aircraft had been in service for exactly 5 months. The crews had almost no combat experience. They were flying the most complicated torpedo bomber ever built into the teeth of the most experienced carrier force in the world. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol fell upon them like wolves. Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, flown by veterans of Pearl Harbor, China, and the Dutch East Indies, tore into the lumbering Avengers. The TBF's defensive armament, a single 50-caliber machine gun in the dorsal turret and a 30-caliber gun in the ventral position, proved inadequate against determined fighter attacks. The Avengers were slow. At maximum torpedo attack speed, they could barely manage 130 miles per hour. The Zeros could exceed 300. One by one, the Avengers fell. Ensign Albert Kyle Nest's aircraft took hit after hit. 20-millimeter cannon shells punched through the wings, the fuselage, the tail. His turret gunner, aviation machinist's mate 3rd Class J. Darrell Manning, was killed instantly by a cannon shell to the chest. His radioman, aviation radioman 3rd Class Harry Freer, just 17 years old, was wounded in the head and wrist. The hydraulic system failed. The electrical system sparked and smoked. Ensign's instrument panel shattered. Blood from his wounded radioman sprayed across the cockpit. But the TBF kept flying. The massive radial engine, despite multiple hits, continued to produce power. The self-sealing fuel tanks, one of those intricate systems critics had questioned, prevented the aircraft from exploding when bullets punctured the wings. The armor plating, extra weight that critics said would doom the aircraft's performance, saved Ernest's life when cannon shells struck behind his seat. 5 of the 6 Avengers were shot down. Only Ernest's battered aircraft made it back to Midway, crash landing on the runway with 1 crew member dead and 2 wounded. Both Ernest and Fryer survived their injuries. The young radio man would later recall the moment he realized they might make it home. Blood covering the cockpit, the aircraft barely responding to controls, but still flying. The surviving aircraft was later examined by engineers. It had been struck by at least 9 20mm cannon shells and 64 7.7mm machine gun bullets. Nearly every major system had been damaged or destroyed. The Battle of Midway was hailed as a great American victory. The Japanese lost 4 fleet carriers. American dive bombers received the glory. The torpedo bombers, both the old Devastators and the new Avengers, suffered catastrophic losses. But the sacrifice of Torpedo Squadron 8 would become legendary. Of the 15 Devastators that launched from Hornet, none returned. 29 men were killed. Only Ensign George Gay survived, floating in the ocean, watching the battle unfold above him. The 6 Avengers from Midway lost 5 aircraft and 9 men killed. From the entire squadron, only 3 men survived the battle. Ensign Ernest would be awarded the Navy Cross for his actions at Midway, the first of 3 he would earn during the war. 83% casualties for the Avengers at Midway. Critics renewed their calls to cancel the program. The aircraft was too vulnerable, too elaborate. The losses proved it was a failure. But intelligence officers studying the damaged aircraft reached a different conclusion. Ensign Ernest's TBF had absorbed enough damage to destroy 10 normal aircraft. Yet it had flown home with 2 survivors. The electrical turret, despite the catastrophic damage, had continued to function until the turret gunner was killed. The bomb bay doors had operated correctly under fire. The folding wing mechanism had not failed despite multiple hits to the wing structure. The right engine had run for 2 hours after being struck multiple times. The aircraft was not too elaborate, it was too tough. Every intricate system, every redundancy, every backup had been designed into the TBF for exactly this scenario, taking damage and continuing to fight. The over-engineered, sophisticated Avenger had brought its crew home when no other aircraft could have survived. Production accelerated. By August 1942, dozens of Avengers were reaching fleet squadrons. Torpedo Squadron 8 reformed with new pilots and new aircraft. They would go on to earn 2 Presidential Unit citations, becoming one of the most decorated squadrons in naval aviation history. Ensign Ernest rejoined the squadron and fought at Guadalcanal, earning his 2nd Navy Cross. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942 provided the first real test of Avenger tactics with experienced crews. 28 TBS from the carriers Saratoga and Enterprise attacked the Japanese fleet. 13 Avengers from Saratoga's VT-8 and 15 from Enterprise's VT-3 coordinated their approach. They sank the light carrier Ryujo with multiple torpedo hits. 7 Avengers were lost, but the survivors learned crucial lessons. The aircraft could absorb tremendous damage. The electrical turret could engage multiple fighters simultaneously. The internal bomb bay allowed for quick ordnance changes. The long range allowed for strikes far beyond what previous torpedo bombers could reach. November 1942 brought the naval battle of Guadalcanal. Marine Corps and Navy Avengers played the key role in sinking the Japanese battleship He, a 37,000-ton behemoth that had been crippled in night fighting. The Avengers put torpedoes into the drifting giant, proving that the complicated aircraft could kill capital ships. But the most remarkable transformation was happening in the Atlantic Ocean, far from the Pacific headlines. German U-boat were winning the tonnage war, sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. The introduction of small escort carriers provided air coverage for convoys, but existing aircraft were inadequate for anti-submarine warfare. The Avenger, with its large bomb bay, long range, and ability to carry radar, proved perfect for the role. The TBF-1D variant, equipped with ASB surface search radar, could detect surfaced U-boat at night or in bad weather. The large bomb bay could carry depth charges, bombs, acoustic torpedoes, and the top-secret Mark 24 faming torpedo. Avengers operating from escort carriers began stalking U-boat with devastating effectiveness. The aircraft that had been designed to sink battleships was now hunting submarines. The tactics were elegant in their simplicity. Avengers equipped with radar would patrol ahead of convoys, searching for surfaced U-boat. When contact was made, the Avenger would attack with depth charges and rockets, forcing the submarine to dive. Once submerged, the U-boat's speed dropped from 18 knots to 8 knots. The Avenger would circle overhead, dropping sonobuoys to track the submerged submarine while calling in destroyer escorts for the kill. If the submarine tried to surface and run, the Avenger would be waiting with more depth charges. If the submarine stayed submerged, the destroyers would arrive. From May 1943 to May 1945, Avengers flying from American escort carriers sank or assisted in sinking 35 U-boat in the Atlantic. British Avengers, which the Royal Navy designated Tarpon and later Avenger, added to the tally. The total submarine kills reached approximately 30 when counting Pacific operations against Japanese submarines. No other aircraft came close to this record. The sophisticated radar systems, the large internal bay that could carry multiple weapons types, the long endurance that allowed 8-hour patrols, all of it combined to create the most effective submarine killer of the war. The year 1944 brought the Avenger to its peak effectiveness. By this time, nearly 10,000 had been built. GM supplied most of those aircraft in their FBM series. General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division had taken over most production, churning out 7,546 TBMs, while Grumman built 2,290 TBFS. The transition had been remarkable. When Grumman needed to focus on producing the new F-6F Hellcat fighter, they delivered a demonstration TBF to General Motors held together entirely with sheet metal screws. This PK Avenger, named for Parker Calon screw manufacturer, allowed GM engineers to disassemble the aircraft part by part and redesign it for automotive-style mass production. Leroy Grumman had doubted GM could build even one Avenger. Instead, GM produced more than 3 times as many as Grumman itself. The TBM-3 variant, with a more powerful R2620 engine producing 1,900 horsepower, began reaching squadrons in mid-1944. The additional power helped offset the weight of new radar equipment, additional armor, and increased fuel capacity. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 showcased everything the Avenger could do. The engagement, later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, decimated Japanese carrier aviation. American fighters shot down over 250 Japanese aircraft in a single day. But the real test came afterward. Admiral Mark Mitchell learned the Japanese carrier fleet was retreating at extreme range. Over 200 Avengers participated in the mission Beyond Darkness, Mitchell's desperate gamble to catch the fleeing enemy. The strike launched late in the afternoon, knowing many aircraft would return in darkness. Avengers from the carrier Bellawood sank the light carrier Hio, hitting the Japanese ship with torpedoes in deteriorating weather and fading light. 247 Japanese sailors died when Hio capsized. Many Avengers ran out of fuel on the return flight, ditching in the ocean or crashing on carrier decks in complete darkness. Mitchell ordered every ship in the fleet to turn on lights, breaking all blackout protocols to guide the aircraft home. 80 pilots and crew were lost, but the mission proved the Avenger could operate in conditions that would ground other bombers. The long range, the reliable engines, the tough airframe all contributed to missions that should have been impossible. October 1944 brought the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Over 200,000 personnel participated. Japanese forces committed virtually their entire remaining fleet in a desperate attempt to destroy the American invasion force at Leyte. The battle sprawled across hundreds of miles of ocean, involving 4 separate engagements over 3 days. Approximately 400 Avengers participated across all phases of the battle. The engagement at Samar became one of the most dramatic confrontations in naval history.
6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts faced 4 Japanese battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The escort carriers, designated Taffy 3, carried Avengers and Wildcats designed for ground support, not fleet engagement. When Admiral Teo Kurita's center force appeared on the horizon at dawn on October 25, the Americans were outnumbered and outgunned. Lieutenant Commander Edward Huxtable, commanding officer of Gambia Bay's Composite Squadron 10, directed his Avengers in continuous attacks against the massive Japanese ships. The Avengers had no armor-piercing bombs. Many had no torpedoes, having been loaded for ground support missions. They attacked anyway, making repeated runs with whatever ordnance they carried.
Some pilots made dry runs with no weapons at all, trying to distract Japanese gunners and buy time for the carriers to escape. The small destroyers charged the Japanese battleships in suicidal torpedo attacks. The Avengers coordinated with them, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Gambia Bay was hit repeatedly and sank, taking over 100 men with her. But the ferocity of the American defense convinced Admiral Kurita he faced fleet carriers with full air groups, not escort carriers. After sinking Gambia Bay and 3 destroyers, Kurita withdrew through San Bernardino Strait, abandoning the attack on the invasion fleet. The Avengers of Taffy 3 had helped turn away the most powerful surface fleet Japan had sent to sea since Midway. They had done so without the weapons or training for such a mission, proving the aircraft's versatility under the most desperate circumstances. On October 24, 1944, the day before the summer engagement, waves of American aircraft attacked the super battleship Musashi as it tried to transit the Sibuan Sea. The Musashi was the largest battleship ever built, displacing over 72,000 tons, armed with 9 18-inch guns protected by armor up to 16 inches thick. Japanese designers had declared the ship unsinkable. The attack began at 10:27 in the morning. 259 aircraft launched in 6 waves from 4 American carriers converged on the massive ship. Avengers scored torpedo hits from multiple directions. The exact number remains disputed, with estimates ranging from 10 to 19 torpedoes striking home. 10 hits to port and 9 to starboard represents one commonly cited figure, though Japanese sources report 11 total. Each torpedo carried 600 pounds of Torpex explosive, far more powerful than standard TNT. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers added 17 bomb hits. Just after 7:30 in the evening, the Musashi capsized and sank, taking 1,023 of her crew with her. The largest battleship ever built had been killed by aircraft, and Avengers had delivered critical blows. 5 months later, on April 7, 1945, the Musashi's sister ship Yamato made her final sortie. Operation Tengo was a suicide mission, sending the super battleship on a one-way trip to Okinawa with only enough fuel for the outbound voyage. American submarines spotted the task force and reported its position. Admiral Mitchell launched everything he had. 386 aircraft, including nearly 150 Avengers, swarmed the Japanese force. The attack began at 12:37 in the afternoon. The first wave of Avengers attacked from the port side, overwhelming the Yamato's anti-aircraft defenses. The second wave attacked from starboard. The third wave found the ship listing heavily but still afloat. The torpedo impacts continued. American sources report at least 11 torpedo hits, though the exact count from different aircraft types remains uncertain. The Yamato's massive armor, designed to defeat battleship shells, could not stop torpedoes hitting below the waterline. Internal compartments flooded. The list increased. At 2:23 in the afternoon, 2 hours and 46 minutes after the first attack, the Yamato exploded in a mushroom cloud visible for 60 meters. Casualties numbered between 2,500 and 3,100 crew members from a complement of approximately 3,000. The era of the battleship died with her. The Avengers had killed both Yamato-class super battleships. They had also sunk or helped sink 12 carriers, 4 additional battleships, 19 cruisers,
25 destroyers and approximately 30 submarines. The total tonnage exceeded 1 million tons of enemy shipping. No other aircraft type came close to this record. The intricate torpedo bomber that critics had dismissed in 1941 had become the most effective ship killer in history. But the vast majority of Avenger missions were not dramatic torpedo attacks. By late 1944, Japanese surface ships rarely ventured from port. The Mark 13 torpedo, despite late war improvements, remained problematic, requiring slow, straight attack runs that exposed aircraft to intense anti-aircraft fire. Avengers increasingly shifted to conventional bombing, skip bombing, and rocket attacks. The large internal bay that could carry a single 2,000-pound torpedo could also carry 2,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, or combinations of weapons. Avengers supported amphibious landings across the Pacific, dropping bombs and firing rockets against Japanese bunkers, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. The missions were unglamorous but essential. The aircraft's versatility extended beyond combat. The roomy interior could carry cargo, mail, and personnel. Avengers served as air ambulances, evacuating wounded from island airstrips. They flew reconnaissance missions, mapping enemy positions. They laid mines in Japanese harbors and coastal waters. They performed search and rescue, locating downed pilots. The sophisticated Aident, a design that seemed like a liability in 1941, proved to be the aircraft's greatest strength by 1945. The Avenger could do everything. One Avenger pilot who experienced the aircraft's toughness firsthand was Ensign George Herbert Walker Bush. Born June 12, 1924, Bush enlisted in the Navy on his 18th birthday, June 12, 1942, the day he graduated from Phillips Academy. He became the youngest commissioned naval aviator at the time when he earned his wings. On June 9, 1943, at age 18, Bush was assigned to Torpedo Squadron 51 aboard the carrier San Jacinto. He flew 58 combat missions in Avengers, logging 1,228 flight hours and making 128 carrier landings. He participated in operations against Wake Island, the Marianas, the Bonin Islands, and the Philippines. On September 2, 1944, 19-year-old Bush was flying his TBM Avenger named Barbara after his fiancée from the carrier San Jacinto on a bombing mission against Japanese installations on Chichijima. His crew consisted of Lieutenant Junior Grade William White, the ordnance officer, and radio man Second Ass John Delaney. The target was a radio transmitter complex heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns. Bush's aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire over the target. The engine caught fire. Smoke filled the cockpit. Despite the fire, Bush pressed the attack and completed his bomb run, hitting the radio facility. As flames spread through the fuselage, Bush gave the order to bail out. He headed the burning aircraft out to sea, away from the island, to give his crew the best chance of rescue away from Japanese forces. Bush bailed out at approximately 2,000 feet. His parachute deployed successfully, but he hit his head on the tail stabilizer as he left the aircraft.
He landed in the ocean, bleeding from a forehead wound. When he surfaced, he saw no sign of his 2 crew members. Neither White nor Delaney survived. Their parachutes failed to deploy properly. Bush inflated his life raft and paddled desperately away from Chichijima. Japanese boats came out from the island, searching for him. He paddled for hours, growing weaker from his wound and exhaustion. Other American aircraft circled above, trying to protect him until rescue arrived. After 4 hours in the water, the submarine USS Finbox surfaced nearby. Crewmen pulled the exhausted pilot aboard. Bush was the only survivor from his aircraft. For his actions at Chichijima, completing his bomb run despite his aircraft being on fire, Bush was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He would complete his combat tour, then return stateside as a flight instructor. After the war, Bush would serve as congressman, ambassador to the United Nations, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, vice president, and finally the 41st president of the United States. In 2009, the Navy commissioned the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, designated CVN-77 in his honor. Bush flew 58 combat missions in Avengers, logging 1,228 flight hours and making 128 carrier landings. He experienced what thousands of other Avenger pilots learned. The aircraft was intricate, demanding, and unforgiving of mistakes. But when battle damage came, when enemy fire struck, when systems failed, the sophisticated design kept you alive. The redundancy, the over-engineering, the multiple backups, all of it worked together to bring crews home. The statistics tell the story that critics refuse to see. Nearly 10,000 Avengers delivered. Over 46,000 combat sorties flown. Total combat losses, 729 aircraft. The loss rate, 1.58% per sortie, was among the lowest of any combat aircraft in the war. Anti-air aircraft fire accounted for 422 losses. Aerial combat accounted for just 47 losses. Operational accidents, mostly landing mishaps on carrier decks, accounted for 260. The elaborate systems that were supposed to fail rarely did. The aircraft that was too heavy to fight proved too tough to kill. Comparison with other torpedo bombers reveals the Avenger's dominance. The Japanese Nakajima B-5NK, which had devastated Pearl Harbor, was obsolete by 1943, lacking the speed, range, and defensive armament to survive against American fighters. The British Fairey Swordfish, despite its legendary status, was a fabric-covered biplane that survived only because it operated in environments where modern fighters were rare. The American Douglas TBD Devastator was slaughtered at Midway. Torpedo Squadron 8, flying Devastators from Hornet, lost all 15 aircraft and 29 crew members in their attack. The Avenger, flying the same mission, the same day, brought one aircraft home with 2 survivors. That battered TBF proved what would become the norm: survivability through robust engineering. The Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, the Navy's dive bomber, suffered constant mechanical problems throughout the war. Pilots called it the Beast, and the name was not affectionate. The Helldiver's complexity led to failures. The Avenger's complexity led to redundancy. The difference was philosophy. Curtiss tried to make an elaborate aircraft that was barely good enough. Grumman made an elaborate aircraft that was far better than necessary, then made it even tougher. Post-war analysis revealed the deeper truth. The Avenger succeeded not despite its complexity, but because of it. Every intricate system served multiple purposes. The large bomb bay that added weight and complexity allowed the aircraft to carry torpedoes, bombs, depth charges, mines, radar equipment, acoustic torpedoes, reconnaissance cameras, auxiliary fuel, tanks, and cargo. No other aircraft had this flexibility. The electrical turret that critics said would fail proved more reliable than hydraulic systems and allowed for faster tracking of attacking fighters. The stow-wing folding mechanism that added weight and parts allowed the large aircraft to fit on small escort carriers, multiplying the number of ships that could operate Avengers. The stow-wing itself represented a triumph of innovative engineering. Leroy Grumman conceived the design during a meeting using simple materials at hand. He took a pink eraser to represent the fuselage and stuck paper clips into it as wings. By experimenting with different angles, he discovered a compound pivot point that allowed the wings to simultaneously fold upward and rearward. The resulting mechanism, called stow-wing, reduced the 54-foot 2-inch wingspan to approximately 18 feet when folded. This ingenious design allowed the massive Avenger to fit on the elevators of even the smallest escort carriers. The stow-wing became a signature feature of Grumman aircraft for decades, appearing on the Hellcat, Bearcat, Cougar, and eventually the E-2 Hawkeye. The tough construction that made the aircraft heavy saved countless lives. Avengers absorbed damage that would destroy other aircraft and kept flying. Pilots reported flying back to carriers with wings full of holes, engines trailing smoke, hydraulics failed, electrical systems shorted, and the aircraft still responded to controls. The overbuilt structure, the redundant systems, even the excessive weight, all of it contributed to bringing crews home alive. By the war's end, the Avenger had flown more combat missions than any other Navy torpedo bomber.
It had sunk more enemy ships than any other American aircraft type. It had destroyed more submarines than any other aircraft in history. It had served in more roles, more theaters, and more conditions than any contemporary bomber. The aircraft, dismissed as too intricate, had proven to be perfectly engineered for everything war demanded. The Avenger service did not end in 1945. Post-war variants continued flying with the U.S. Navy until 1954, when newer aircraft finally replaced them in frontline service. The Royal Canadian Navy operated Avengers until 1960, using them for anti-submarine warfare in the North Atlantic. The Canadian AS-3 variant featured a magnetic anomaly detection boom extending from the rear fuselage, sophisticated electronics for tracking submerged Soviet submarines, and the endurance to patrol the frigid North Atlantic for hours. The TBM-3E and its derivatives served with remarkable longevity.
France operated Avengers from the carrier Aromanche in Indochina during the early 1950s. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force used Avengers for anti-submarine patrol into the early 1960s. The Netherlands operated them from their carrier, Carol Doorman. Brazil, Uruguay, and other nations found the Avengers' combination of payload capacity, range, and reliability perfect for maritime patrol. The elaborate aircraft that was supposedly difficult to maintain proved remarkably easy to keep flying, with many nations preferring it to newer, supposedly better designs. The TBM-3W variant pioneered airborne early warning, carrying the massive AN/APS-20 radar and a ventral rad. This flying radar platform could detect enemy aircraft at ranges far beyond what ship-based radar could achieve, providing fleet air defense coordinators with crucial early warning. The TBM-3S variant specialized in anti-submarine warfare, carrying advanced sonar buoys, radar, and acoustic homing torpedoes. These variants proved so successful that Avengers remained in U.S. Navy service for 9 years after the war ended, an exceptional service life for a World War II design. The aircraft's final combat use came in 1951 during the Korean War, but contrary to legend, Avengers did not fly the last torpedo attack in history. That distinction belongs to the Douglas AD Skyraider, the Avenger's successor. On May 1, 1951, 8 AD-4 Skyraiders from Attack Squadron 195 and Composite Squadron 35 launched from the carrier Princeton to strike the Huiyan Dam in North Korea. The dam controlled water flow to the Pukon River, and North Korean forces were using it strategically by releasing water to flood areas where UN forces were advancing, then stopping the flow to trap them in the exposed riverbed. The Skyraiders carried Mark 13 torpedoes, the same weapon the Avenger had carried throughout the war. 8 torpedoes were dropped, 7 hit the dam, 6 exploded, blasting holes in the concrete structure and crippling the dam for the rest of the war. This mission remains the last time in history that aerial torpedoes were used against a surface target. The era of the torpedo bomber ended where it had reached its peak, with aircraft launching torpedoes against strategic targets. The Avenger had defined that era, setting standards that even its successor, the formidable Skyraider, ultimately could not exceed. Modern analysis of the Avenger reveals design decisions far ahead of their time. The modular internal bay that could accept different weapons without modification anticipated modern multi-role fighters. The extensive use of electrical systems over hydraulics predicted jet-age designs. The emphasis on crew survivability over pure performance foreshadowed military aviation philosophy for the next 70 years. The integration of radar, radio, and electronic warfare equipment into a single airframe created the template for modern naval aviation. William Schwendler, Leroy Grumman, Robert Hall, and the engineering team at Grumman Aircraft had not just built an elaborate torpedo bomber, they had built the future of naval aviation wrapped in a barrel-shaped fuselage that critics called ugly. They had proven that survivability could be engineered into an aircraft through redundancy and robust construction. They had demonstrated that versatility mattered more than specialization. They had shown that crew comfort and capability enabled mission success more than raw performance numbers. The design philosophy that created the Avenger influenced American naval aviation for decades. The emphasis on bringing crews home alive became central to U.S. Navy aircraft design. The focus on multi-role capability shaped future requirements. The integration of advanced electronics and weapons systems established patterns that continue today. The Avenger was not just a successful World War II aircraft. It was a template for how to build combat aircraft that could adapt, survive, and accomplish diverse missions. The numbers speak for themselves. 12 aircraft carriers sunk or helped sink. 6 battleships, including the 2 largest ever built. 19 cruisers. 25 destroyers. Approximately 30 submarines. Over 500 merchant ships. 1 million tons of enemy shipping sent to the bottom. 729 aircraft lost out of nearly 10,000 built. 46,000 combat sorties. 1.58% loss rate. The highest kill ratio of any American aircraft in World War II, measuring ships sunk per aircraft lost. The designers who created this record never intended to build the most beautiful aircraft. They never tried to build the simplest aircraft. They built the most effective aircraft, and effectiveness required sophistication. Every system, every redundancy, every backup, every ounce of extra weight contributed to the mission. Critics who saw only complications missed the purpose behind every decision. This aircraft was not elaborate for the sake of complexity. It was sophisticated because war is unpredictable and survival requires preparation for every contingency. The production achievement itself deserves recognition. 9,836 Avengers were built in just 3 years. At peak production, factories delivered over 200 aircraft per month. General Motors, a company that had never built a single airplane before the war, became the primary manufacturer through innovative production techniques. The transformation of automobile factories into aircraft plants, accomplished in months, demonstrated American industrial capacity at its peak. The same assembly line workers who had built Chevrolets now built torpedo bombers, working 3 shifts to meet Navy demands. The Avenger's operational versatility proved equally impressive. Beyond the famous torpedo attacks, Avengers flew more missions dropping conventional bombs than torpedoes. They pioneered night operations, using radar to find and attack targets in complete darkness. They performed combat search and rescue, saving hundreds of downed pilots from the Pacific. They served as airborne ambulances, evacuating critically wounded personnel from island battles. They delivered supplies to isolated garrisons. They photographed enemy installations for intelligence analysis. They patrolled shipping lanes for submarines. They provided close air support for marine infantry. No other single aircraft type performed such diverse missions successfully. The human cost of Avenger operations, while lower than other torpedo bomber types, remained significant. Approximately 730 crews were lost in combat, representing over 2,000 American lives. Many more were wounded. The aircraft could bring crews home through tremendous damage, but it could not make them invulnerable. The low loss rate meant more crews survived to complete their tours. More pilots returned to train new aviators. More experience was preserved and passed forward. The engineering decisions that prioritized survivability translated directly into lives saved. Individual acts of heroism by Avenger crews fill volumes of pre-naval history. Beyond the famous names, thousands of pilots, bombardiers, radiomen, and turret gunners flew into anti-aircraft fire and fighter attacks to deliver their weapons on target. They flew missions in typhoons, in darkness, at extreme range, under impossible conditions. They pressed attacks against overwhelming defenses. They stayed with crippled aircraft to bring wounded crew members home rather than bailing out safely themselves.
The Avenger gave them a fighting chance. Their courage did the rest. The torpedo bomber is gone now. Modern anti-ship missiles accomplish in minutes what required wings full of torpedo bombers in 1944. No nation operates torpedo bombers. The mission itself has been obsoleted by technology. But the lessons of the Avenger remain relevant across all domains of engineering and design. Over-engineering for survivability saves lives. Redundancy wins battles. Sophistication, when purposeful and well executed, creates capability.
Versatility often matters more than specialization. The ability to absorb damage and continue functioning determines survival. These principles apply far beyond aviation. The Avenger demonstrated that robust construction costs less than replacement. The additional weight of armor, redundant systems, and overbuilt structure was repaid many times over, in aircraft that survived to fly again, in crews that lived to fight again, in reduced training requirements because experienced pilots stayed alive. The accountants might have preferred lighter, cheaper aircraft. The combat record proved them wrong. Investment in survivability paid dividends measured in victories won and lives saved. The ugliest duckling can become the deadliest hunter. And sometimes the aircraft everyone calls too elaborate is exactly sophisticated enough to do what nothing else can do. The Avenger proved this truth in the most demanding crucible imaginable: combat against a determined enemy who had prepared for war while America slept. The aircraft critics dismissed accomplished what more elegant designs could not. It rewrote the rules of naval warfare. It established new standards for aircraft survivability. It demonstrated capabilities that influenced military aviation for generations. Today, surviving Avengers fly at airshows, reminding new generations of what American industry and American airmen accomplished. Approximately 60 Avengers remain in various conditions worldwide. Several are maintained in airworthy condition by dedicated organizations and collectors. When a restored Avenger flies overhead, its unmistakable silhouette and distinctive engine note transport observers back to a time when these unlikely warriors ruled the Pacific skies. The Avenger that took off from Bethpage in August 1941. The ungainly beast that critics dismissed proved them all wrong. It did not do so through elegance or simplicity. It did so through relentless effectiveness, mission after mission, year after year, in every role war demanded. The sophisticated torpedo bomber that should have failed instead rewrote the rules of naval aviation and sank more enemy ships than any other aircraft in history. In the end, it was not elaborate enough to fail. It was sophisticated enough to win. And in winning, it brought home more of its crews alive than any other torpedo bomber ever built. That achievement, more than tonnage sunk or battle stars earned, stands as the true measure of the Avenger's success. The aircraft kept its promise. It brought them home.